Our next piece we're going to look at is nonverbal communication codes. So these are some specific terminology and language that's related to nonverbal communication, different types of nonverbal communication. So we're going to look at body movement. The other term for that is kinesics, voice or vocalics, haptics or touch, space, which is called proxemics, physical appearance, objects, which is called artifacts, and the environment. So first one we're going to look at is body movements, and this one deals mostly with how we interact with the movement of our body. So that would be facial expressions, gestures, and posture. So the first one we're going to look at is this idea of what comes across our face. Now, I'm one of those people that has a little bit of a plastic face, so I will make really strange facial expressions occasionally just to kind of express an emotion or just out of goofiness. There's a lot of fun. I mean, think of Jim Carrey. Yeah, Jim Carrey has sort of a plastic face that he can mold his face into lots of different expressions to suggest an emotion or a feeling or inquisitiveness, or in his case, for humor, for just humor purposes. Eye contact is another one. Eye contact is interesting because, you know, we can communicate a lot of different things through eye contact. Maybe how interested you are in a person's communication with you, or if you are kind of interested in the person, you might, you know, spend a little bit more time looking at them. You could be like suggesting hostility, like if you got the prolonged stare. Sometimes I've seen that with, you know, somebody staring the other person down, like, I'm going to tell you, and we use the stare to do that. So that one's kind of humorous. It does seem to happen more with men, this kind of aggressive stare, but you will see, I mean, all kinds of different looks that people give and different types of eye contact that are shared. Next piece would be gestures and how we use our body and our hands. So I mentioned before the flipping of the bird would be falling under the emblem category. So it's a specific symbol that represents a specific meaning. So that has a specific meaning. Illustrators are meant to accentuate. So if I am explaining something in a story and I gesture along with my hands to show what happened, that would be an example of an illustrator. A regulator often shows, like, we're going to take turns. So as a listener, you might, you know, let the other person know, hey, it's your turn to speak. So maybe I might nod at them to let them know, or maybe, you know, I might glance down at my watch to let them know that you know, we're in a hurry, so we need to kind of finish what we're saying. So that might be another one that can show up. Adapters are a gesture sometimes made to help somebody maybe going through a rough time. So putting your hands maybe on the back of somebody's shoulder if they're feeling sad, suggesting that, you know, I'm here for you, kind of thing, would be an example of an adapter. And then the person's posture would also suggest information about that person. So how they hold their body. Are they very straight backed, or do they lean forward? Do they keep their shoulders slumped, or their shoulders back? Is their head looking up or tilted? How are they holding their physical body? And this idea of immediacy, sometimes if you find somebody particularly interesting, you might lean into them, showing that you're more interested or that you find them more attractive. So I think and I mentioned acting before, if you are an actor, you know, you learn these on purpose because you want to be able to use them in acting. So how do you use your physicality? How do you show somebody information? And there's been times when I've had people misread this. Like there have been times when I was at work, when I was working in the call center, and someone came by and they stopped by to talk to me, and you know, I wasn't really in the mood to talk, or you know, I was initially interested in what they had to say, but then they just keep talking. And I've done things where I've completely initially, if you're showing somebody that you're interested, you're going to turn your body towards them and then have your basically physicality, your face and your shoulders and everything facing them. And then for me, I would turn myself to the side and be at my desk and turn myself to the side so they were looking at the side of my face and they still continue talking. And I literally turned my back to them and was typing on the computer and they can still continue talking. So it's, we have these kind of cues kind of set up to let a person know, hey, I'm really involved. I really want to hear what you have to say. And then, there are cues. I mean, and obviously if a person doesn't recognize them, they're not going to see it as a cue. But just in general in our culture, if you've basically gone from being completely facing them to your back being to them, that generally suggested. I was doing it intentionally, and they just didn't pick up on that at all. I was like, okay. So yeah. We can use things like body movements to sort of have power over or influence another person. So that's another piece that we can look at. So we go through this idea of body movements. Another piece that goes along with this, because a lot of times we may be talking and using body movements, and the same thing is going to happen with the way we use our voice. So this next piece is called vocalics, and it has to do with the way our pitch, our tone, the loudness, and oftentimes we form impressions about a person's identity or who they are socially, ethnically, and individually based on their voice. So if you have an anticipation of somebody that has a very ethnic draw, depending on where they're from. So let's say that they're from the United States and they're from the southern part of the United States. They're going to have a different way of speaking. Or if they come from like New York or New Jersey, those guys have another way of speaking. And then maybe if you're from the Pacific or you're from this, the central part, you'll hear different accents. And that does kind of form impressions. People form impressions about who that person is based on the way that they speak. And I think sometimes does their voice match what they look like? I've had people say that my voice didn't match what I look like when they saw me. And I think, if you meet me and you get my voice at the same time, I don't think anyone has that impression, but I thought that was interesting. I mean, you get feedback about things like that, and you just look at it and say, okay, does this seem true to me, or does it matter? Or is that something that's valuable to know? I personally actually lowered my voice. So this one comes in with this idea of pitch, but I personally lowered my voice when I was younger to have it be in a more pleasant range. My voice is kind of high. I sing at a second soprano, so my voice is on the higher side, but it's not necessarily super pleasant for people to listen to. So I purposely lowered my voice. If you listen to the broadcasters on television, on say your television news, at least most of the channels I listen to outside of the weather person and even most of the weather people that they hire have voices that are on the lower side. And people have a tendency to trust people with a deeper voice, even females, but even guys, they trust them more just because their voice is lower. The tone of a person's voice relates to the richness or the breathiness of their voice. So they can look at those two elements to kind of determine that. And I think that gives sort of a sense about the quality of a person's voice. If the person has a deep booming voice, that kind of carries differently than if they have sort of a high-pitched, sort of squeaky voice. So the tone and the richness of the person's voice changes. James Earl Jones is one of those people that just has a beautiful voice. Another one is I can't remember his name at this moment. But there's a lot of guys out there with just beautiful resonant voices, and certainly when you sing, those are the same elements that kind of come into that. So loudness is how loud or soft a person's voice is. and where we put the emphasis on in different words as well. I remember a guy I used to work with, and he would use the same tone of voice whether he was in a big room or a small room, and it was always loud. I'm like, maybe you can adjust how loud you are based on where you're at, because he's like, I can make my voice go really far, and I'm like, that's great, but you're in a really small room, so maybe tone it down a little bit. So really adjusting your sound and the loudness of your voice depending on the circumstances. If you're in a library, generally, I mean, at least the old rule of thumb was you were quiet in the library. If you're going into a classroom or into a lecture, you generally don't go in talking at your loudest voice. So there's a certain amount of respectfulness that kind of goes along with loudness. And also we can change the meaning depending on where we put the emphasis on the word. So will John leave the room versus will John leave the room? We get different meaning based on where we place our emphasis and the loudness of certain terminology. We also can use this idea of kind of yelling by using capital letters when we're texting or emailing. So there's the same idea of how we can communicate this idea of loudness, but the volume at which somebody speaks, really can change the meaning or the interpretation of the message that's coming across. The speech rate. Now I actually measured myself, and I'm in the normal range, but I'm on the fast side of normal, which can be a challenge if you don't speak English as a first language. So speech rate can be a challenge for people. I know for me, when I listen to somebody, and I studied Spanish and German, I have no chance of remembering any of my German, but at least I've been around Spanish a little bit, so I can, if I sit and listen, I can sometimes pick up, chunks of what people are saying, but if they're going fast, I am lost. So speed is just huge. If you're talking to somebody, again, from an international side, it is nice for you to slow down. They don't need you to talk louder, they just need you to slow down. So speech rate can be really beneficial if English is not your first one. Okay, so we go from voice, now we're gonna go into touch. And the terminology for touch is called haptics. Now haptics relates to a couple things. It looks at the duration, strength, and location of where you're touching somebody. So say, for example, that you're interested in somebody romantically. Maybe you might hold on to their hand a little longer than somebody else. You normally shake somebody's hand, but if someone kind of lingers on your hand for a little bit, you're kind of like, it does make you stop because you're like, what's going on? Because we're just supposed to shake hands and pull back, and someone shakes your hand and they don't let go. You're like, wait, what's going on? So there's that piece. There's the strength, right? So if they're touching you, say if they're touching you on the shoulder and they're using a very firm hand, that's different. Also, if you got the strong handshake, and of course, the location where they're touching you. So that changes. Oftentimes I say to people, be careful about touching people around the head area. If you're going to touch somebody, the safer place to touch them is on the arm or on the very back of the shoulder, like towards the edge, up towards the shoulder, maybe on the back of the shoulder blade, just slightly. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of physical abuse for people, and being touched in certain locations, usually around the head, can make them kind of react because they might have had some sort of interaction with someone in the past, unfortunately. So let's look at some types of touch. So the first one we look at is this one that's called functional or professional, and it's meant to accomplish a task. So if someone needs to touch, like a doctor might need to touch you, or if you are working with a massage therapist, perhaps that might be more along the functional side of touch. So social or polite touch comes with norms or expectations, and oftentimes this would show up like a handshake, something to that effect. So that's going to be, like I said, generally you reach in to shake somebody's hands and the hand comes back, not a long lingering handshake. That's a little unusual. a friendship touch. So if you touch somebody and maybe you touch the person's arm, or I don't know, my friends I hug. I'm a hugger, so I will hug my friends. So that is common with me. And so for that piece, that would be more of a friendship and warmth touch. It does depend on the degree of closeness with them as well. Then there's love and intimacy. So this idea of cupping somebody's face or looking or giving like a long hug. Sometimes those, again, are going to kind of suggest those intimate feelings. And then sexual arousal, I think that kind of speaks for itself. The idea that, there's touch for stimulation, and then there's aggressive or hostile touch. So this idea of pushing, slapping, hitting, shoving, those ideas. Now, as a competent communicator, as a good communicator, you want to be able to adapt your touch or how you interact with someone with touch based on the person that you're interacting with. And there are people that don't like to be touched. So those are things that you need to take into consideration and be aware of as you're interacting with people. So that's an important component in that area. So touch, yeah, pretty powerful stuff. Now, along with touch goes personal space, like how far away is it okay for someone to be? So I think the image here comes from the textbook. This image suggests how far away is okay. So if you're in somebody's intimate, let's go with public space first, because I think that's more common. And this would be more like if you're at in a speaking engagement and you've got some people a certain distance away from you, that would be more common. She's got groceries, so that suggests grocery store, right? If you're in somebody's social space, then you're 4 to 12 feet away. So this idea of when you're meeting someone for the first time, you're just interacting with someone, maybe you're passing them in the hall, this would be more of a social space. Now I think about this too, since I ride the light rail, the bus and light rail, if we looked across the row, we're still not quite far enough away. We're actually in somebody's personal space. So if you notice that when you get on, if there's enough room, people will generally give each other a lot of space, like a lot of room in between. So it's kind of an interesting way to watch how people interact. And like, even if you're on an elevator, you don't have 4 to 12 feet. You maybe have 4 feet, maybe 4 feet, but you don't have 12 feet. So you really are going to be kind of forced to be within somebody's more close space. But if you're on the, commuting, and there's going to have to be somebody sitting right next to you, they're going to be in your personal space. Now, I love this because my father traveled to Japan and got on the bus, and he tells the story about what happened to him on the bus or on the trains there. And he said his friend pushed his suitcase on before him, not realizing kind of the process that happens there. But he pushed his suitcase on before him, and then they have pushers, and they literally pack them in there like little sardines. There's actually pictures of people with their little faces pushed up against the window, and there's videos of them shoving them in, and they literally go and push their bodies against them and make sure their coats are tucked into the train. It's a fascinating idea, and I think to myself, I have a little claustrophobia, so to me this would be terrifying to have somebody that close to me. And he said this guy that pushed his suitcase in ended up writing for 10 minutes with himself bent over the top of his suitcase. And then he ended up with his face in some guy's armpit for 10 minutes because they were shoved that close and there really wasn't an opportunity to adjust. I thought, wow, that to me would be terrifying. Another thing I thought was really fascinating is in America, we make lines and we believe in lines, and you don't butt into lines. Kids will tell you if you get in and you butt in the line, they'll tell you no butting. So that idea of butting into a line is interesting, and other countries don't do lines. So they just do a blob, I guess. And I've had people tell me that ended up being in their favor because they were taller, and they, you know, so they were able to reach over or whatever in order to kind of get what they needed in situations where they were just kind of grouped together. And this idea of territoriality, I think, is interesting because let me cover intimate space first. So this idea of intimate space would be someone that would be 0 to 18 inches. So that person would pretty much need to be someone that you were really close with if they're going to be that close to you. That's kind of breath smelling distance. So yeah, that's a little bit close. But I think territoriality is interesting to me because when we look at animals in the animal kingdom, a lot of times they will mark out territories, and we are basically an animal, so it's not a surprise that we're doing the same thing, that we have spaces that are our spaces, and we have territoriality in areas that are considered to be our space. So I think that's another powerful idea of understanding how people relate to things, like, this is my room, this is my space, you're in my space. And we'll actually say that, you're in my space, man, get out of my space. Physical appearance the term for physical appearance is physical appearance. So we don't actually have a special term for this particular one. But this would be like how you handle yourself with your hair, your clothing, your body type. I personally think that I can go out with no makeup on and stuff and people just don't notice me. I think I'm kind of invisible. I don't know how invisible I really am, but I perceive myself as being invisible. So I kind of feel like I disappear, but I don't really think I do that good of a job. But you can communicate a lot based on how you are dressing. We used to have, in the call center I worked at, we used to have people that would come in to apply for a job, and they would come in their jeans. And the people at the front desk would say, come back when you're dressed appropriately for a job interview. And part of what happens is that the way that you choose to dress can oftentimes, certainly with an older generation, can oftentimes be interpreted as respect, or, you know, how you're perceiving your environment. So if you were dressed in a very casual way for a job interview, that's kind of considered to be maybe disrespectful in some circles. So that's something to take into consideration. You know, you are choosing how you're going to be interpreted based on the way that you're dressed. So that's, you know, take that kind of thing into account when you're presenting yourself, because you are communicating something to the person that you're speaking with based on the way that you are presenting yourself. Another element that goes in, so we look at a person's clothes, but we also look at what they're wearing on them, like artifacts. So artifacts would be things that can help us kind of express identity. So one of the things I think of is Rolodex. You know, Rolodex, I always say Rolodex. A Rolex, my apologies. They're not carrying around a Rolodex. That would be pretty funny. No, the Rolex, the watch, these really expensive watches that suggest that the very expensive suit, any of those things that are kind of doing that kind of goes along with dress, but then this idea of identity can kind of go along with that as well. Anything that you might have with you. I know for me, I mean, I use an iPhone. That's my thing. And sometimes people can kind of become associated with the type of phone that they're carrying, the type of car that you drive. Those are all elements that kind of go along with how you see yourself, or, you know, these objects that are in the environment that reflect back on who you are. Physical surroundings, there are two major things. So the term for this one is environments, but this relates back to your physical surroundings. And there's two elements to look at with this one, which would be fixed features and semi-fixed features. So the environment can tell you a lot about where you're at. And I think I can give you some really good examples to sort of explain how environment can impact you. So there is fixed features. And I think about going into a big courthouse or a big community building or the Capitol, and they have purposely created very high ceilings. They have kind of the echo effect that happens inside of there. Things are very ornate. suggesting that this is a place of respect. So a lot of the environment, the way that the building has been created, all those elements really lend themselves to you seeing this building as a very important one. Where, you know, you can look at other environments where people purposefully create the environment for specific purposes. So one of the ones I look at is McDonald's versus the Brown Palace. So the Brown Palace is a very nice restaurant. I'll tell you guys a story in just a second because it's kind of funny about the Brown Palace. But let's just start with McDonald's. If we take a look at McDonald's and you look at the colors, first of all, that are there, they're very bright primary colors. So reds, blues, yellows, greens. I don't think they use green there, but red, yellow, red and yellow, orange-ish kind of stuff. That's usually what you'll see when you go into those environments. They're kind of making some changes. I think I've noticed some things kind of shifting with that depending on which one you go to. They have seats that are oftentimes hard and plastic. If we think about that, and you're in a seat that's hard and plastic, are you meant to stay there or are you meant to eat your food and go? I think most people would say, I'm not comfortable. It's not like I'm meant to sit here for a long period of time. They didn't purposely make the seats comfortable for me to sit here. Now we go to the Brown Palace and imagine the Brown Palace and the seats, and you imagine the lighting. If you don't know the Brown Palace, just imagine a very nice restaurant. Imagine the lighting, the seats. Are they made of plastic? Are they made of material, like fabric? Are they, you know, is the light bright or is the light dim? What kind of sounds are you hearing in a nice restaurant? So I know for you know, for me, I went there my senior year. I think it was prom, and I went with a friend, and then they had another couple that was with us who were also friends, and we were just laughing a lot. And so that, first of all, that's not really appropriate for that environment. You're supposed to be, you know, it's a very kind of stiff place. So, but we couldn't help ourselves. We were just having a good time and laughing a lot and enjoying ourselves. And I remember them coming up to us at the end of the meal and bringing us these little, it was a metal bowl with a paper inside with water in it. And there was a couple pieces of lemon. And we had no idea what they were for. So we kind of went around the table, like kind of guessing what it was for. And I was sure it was to freshen our breath. We were supposed to drink it to freshen our breath. But fortunately, my friend Carol at the table was much smarter, had a little more culture than I had. And she said, it's a finger bowl. It's a finger bowl. You dip your fingers in it and you wipe your hands. So I was like, oh, okay, sorry. So fortunately, she saved us from drinking our finger bowls. But I mean, I laugh at that because it kind of, if it's not an environment you're used to being in, you may not have that information. You look at all kinds of environments and they give you lots of information. You look at the grocery store and the way that things are set up in the grocery store. The food, you know, if you go down the cereal aisle, where is the cereal located for children and where is the cereal located for adults? And when you get out the checkout lane, what kinds of things they stick at the checkout lane? You know, they've done this stuff on purpose. They're torturing you. Those people that have children, they're torturing you on purpose. And they're setting things up. But also, you know, even if you look at it, they're actually communicating to you which direction they want you to go. They're pointing things out to you and they're kind of guiding you in specific ways in a very subtle and gentle way. I want you to enter into this door, not the other door. You know, I want you to go this direction, and kind of guiding you as far as how they want you to approach the store. And then another one would be Vegas, like just with the way that Vegas is set up. You know, if you think about where's the clocks, where's the windows, you know, what kind of sounds are you listening to? You'll notice that there aren't any clocks, there aren't any windows, They've got things, a lot of energy and sounds from machines and things that are going on around you that are meant to stimulate you and make you want to play and keep you from knowing how much time has passed. So, and then people come by and give you free drinks while you're there. So there's lots of, you know, reasons for you just to sort of stay there engrossed in your machine. And I'm too busy noticing how much money I just spent, so I'm not very good for that. But you know that it's really meant to pull you in. So the other one that might be mentioned is the semi-fixed features, and those are things that can be changed. So we can do things like move furniture around or change the lighting or maybe paint the walls, things like that. So some things can be changed. The size of the room, you know, without actually doing some construction, probably not going to be able to make that big of a change. But some of the semi-fixed features, those can be altered. So these are the codes of nonverbal communication. And again, when we're looking at these kind of language things, they're really meant to teach you, you know, how they're really meant to teach you how to think. You know, they're giving you communication. They're giving you tools so that we can talk about these things. If you are aware that you're being manipulated in your environment, you know, at least you can make decisions about what you want to do with that. Or if you're aware that, you know, we use objects to help show status and things, that can help you, again, make choices rather than stuff being kind of unconscious and having you be unaware of them. Thank you.